What's going on, everybody? We are back. We got episode number 101 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, we're going to be breaking down UFC London, 14 fight slate, headlined by Curtis Blaydes, Tom Aspinall. Great card. I think both Luke and myself have a fair amount of bets on it. So, a lot to talk about here. Lag's not going to be with us tonight. He's got family visiting him. So, he will be back on the show next week. But Luke and I are holding this down. As usual, you can find me on Twitter at MMA Fox. You can find Luke there at SWR_betting. Guys, if you like the show, please drop a like and subscribe. It'll really help us out. We'd really appreciate it. Would love to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So, yeah, without further ado, let's dive into it. 14 fights, big slate here. It's going to be another early card, which is cool. First fight of the night, we got a weird one. We got Nick Dalby. He's taking on Claudio Silva. Big favorite for Nick Dalby here. Luke, any thoughts here?
Yeah, it's another kind of tricky one where I think the line's wide. There probably is value on Silva, but backing near 40-year-old Brazilians, usually not the most profitable long-term angle, especially with a cardio component. The positive for Silva, obviously, outside of him being a really strong grappler, I mean, he does pretty much come forward and just throw bombs, but visibly slows throughout the fight, has no defense. I think Dalby's the better boxer. Obviously younger, traditionally largely pretty difficult to hold down, decent grappling game defensively as well. So I just think his cardio is a little bit more trustworthy. I think he's the better striker. So, him being favored in the fight makes sense. But I mean, minus 260 or whatever it is, I do think is a bit wide.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more or less in the same boat here. You can make a reasonable case for betting Silva, I guess, but he couldn't take down James Krause really, and that's kind of, to me a glaring red flag. I think I bet him in that spot. It's just like Dalby's more athletic and stronger than Krause is. I'd kind of be surprised if he got him down. And to your point, Dalby's got a pretty good get-up game. He's a pretty good submission or defensive submission grappler, I should say. And if he can't get consistent top time, it's just kind of hard to see what the path is. Like you said, Silva will spam stuff, but I kind of think Dalby's likely going to land with a lot more impact. And Dalby does a pretty good job of minimizing exchanges and just making things into a technical fight, kind of how you saw him beat Daniel Rodriguez. So it's like I'm not really interested in Silva, but I'm also not really interested in Dalby. Like Nick Dalby's just not a minus 300 fighter. That's just not who he is. It's not what his style dictates. So I think he should be fine, but ultimately, it's a pass for me. Moving on, though, got a cool fight here. We got Victoria Leonardo. She's taking on Mandy Baum. Victoria Leonardo seems to be a fairly hot pick this week. I think the line's minus 110 aside now. Some plus money on Leonardo still out there. I don't really have a strong feeling on this fight. I bet like an idiot. I bet Victoria Leonardo at dog money against Manon Fiorot. Obviously, that was a horrendous bet. But I guess for me, it's just like with Leonardo, yeah, if she gets on top of Baum here, she can absolutely dominate. And obviously, that's the most likely path to victory for her. My problem is that she's a bad athlete. She's a bad striker. And I don't think she's a very good wrestler. Like everything has to come from inside trips and body locks in the clinch. And while I know Baum's bottom game has looked bad, she's actually decent in the clinch. I think maybe she just gets physical here by Leonardo, but I kind of think she could actually do some damage in there, whereas I don't think Leonardo can really do much damage to her. And that space, it's probably one-way traffic. So it's like as much as people want to say Baum's not UFC level, I agree. I don't really know that Victoria Leonardo is. I believe you and I faded her with a 3-fight veteran by the name of Chelsea Hackett on Dana White's Contenders series. Yeah, I don't know. I can't hate anybody for taking the poke. I kind of think the floor on Leonardo is low enough that I don't really want to be involved. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if people got in like when it was like plus 130, plus 140, I think that was probably decent, but I think the market's kind of corrected on it. I mean, I largely agree with pretty much everything you said. Probably the ground favors Leonardo. clinch striking favors Baum. I'd say the range striking is probably a slop fest. I don't really rate either girl. I mean, Baum, I would say, is probably a bit more technical, where you get a little bit more bull from Leonardo, but like, it's hard to unsee Leonardo getting kicked in the head twice and just dying. I know people like a big thing people are using this week is the whole strength of competition, which, you know, can't be ignored. Leonardo has fought the better girls. There's no doubt about that, but it's like, she hasn't fought them competitively. So it's gotten dumpstered by them all. I mean, Erin Blanchfield, once again, is, you know, people using that as a reference point, but like, Blanchfield's still a grappler by base, right? Like, she's now, her striking's gotten a lot better, but that fight was like, what was it, like 4 years ago or something?
Long
like
time.
That?
She was like 21, I think.
Yeah. I think might even been younger than that. But my point is, like, I think Baum's actually kind of sneaky live to knock out Leonardo, as stupid as that sounds. So I give kind of a slight lean to Baum standing. Edge on the ground to Leonardo, sloppy low-level fight. I tend to favor the person with more floor upside, just because that tends to be what wins fights more often than not. But yeah, it seems like the entire market's on Leonardo, but I think you also have to factor in that Leonardo sucks, guys. Like, so to have any sort of supreme confidence, we can break down the X's and O's of this fight all we want, but she's no good. I'm sorry. Like, this is an Invicta fight happening in the UFC. So you're asking for variance. Like I said, I don't mind anybody who took the shot on Leonardo early. I probably would have did it myself, but I mean, should be a small play, like a unit, if anything. But yeah, I'm good passing this one.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my thing. She's just like Leonardo is so bad. It's not like you're not buying low on somebody who's had like competitive fights with good fighters, you know. You're buying low on somebody who is quite low in terms of, you know, where their trajectory in the UFC actually is, you know. Anyway, moving on. We got a fun one here. Interesting fight. We got Jai Herbert. He's taking on Kyle Nelson, who's been off for a bit, apparently training to get up to 55. Making his debut there this week. What do you think, Luke?
It's another line I think is a bit wide, because trusting, you know, Jai Herbert at, you know, pretty heavy chalk when he's got pretty clear defensive issues, pretty clear durability issues, pretty clear takedown defense issues. I mean, that's just principally way too big of a line to lay. But on the flip side of the coin, in a guy in Nelson, who obviously hits hard, is live to knock out Herbert in the spot, is potentially live to out wrestle him. The problem with Kyle Nelson is he has 5 minutes of cardio, and that's pretty much about it. He's slowed down significantly in every single one of his extended fights. He just doesn't have the gas to go out there and throw bombs for 15 minutes. So I do think he's live in this fight, but even if he wrestles early, takes Herbert down, Herbert's pretty good about regaining guard, getting back into positions, eventually working back to his feet. I mean, I know he got ran on the ground by Moicano, but it still took Moicano like 9 minutes to submit the guy, and Moicano is a pretty legit black belt. I don't have any faith in the cardio of Nelson, and Nelson's durability is also not any good either, especially considering his defense just completely breaks down. Well, it's not very good to begin with, and it gets even worse throughout the course of fights, where I think Herbert's much faster. He's the much cleaner boxer. He's going to have a 6-inch reach edge in the matchup as well. I do think his cardio is also better. So it's another spot where I think, you know, favoring Herbert makes sense. The line's probably wide, but it's hard for me to, you know, go ahead and take a shot on a guy who I only think has 5 minutes of gas. If you want to play Nelson, I say play him inside the distance, or just look to target overall fight violence.
Yeah, it's tough because it's one of the first lines that stood out to me when I was like, before I taped anything on the card, was Nelson this big of a dog to Herbert. Because as you touched on, in general, Jai Herbert, you know, is not, again, he's like not a minus 300 fighter. Like, he's a good striker, but he's very fragile, and he really, you know, he has no takedown defense. I agree with you. He actually does have decent guard retention, but he's very, very easy to get to the mat. And guys like that, it's just like those guys should almost never be lined up here. And, you know, on the flip side, you know, when you're looking at it on the surface level, it's like, well, Kyle Nelson's aggressive. He hits really hard. He's an okay grappler. It's like, you know, in theory, he should have some tools to give Herbert problems. And I do think he has some tools to give Herbert problems. But to your point, I mean, have we ever seen Kyle Nelson look good past the 7-minute mark in a fight? And so it's could he have improved the cardio going up to 155 pounds? I guess, but I'm not. That's not something I'm really willing to put money behind. That this move has been career changing, and yeah, like he could knock Herbert out early. In theory, he could get on top of him early in this fight. But I'm just more or less of the view of you are like Herbert is a much better striker. He should win the stand up here if he doesn't get clipped, and he should win it very comfortably. If this fight goes past the 8-minute mark, he should really dominate and probably finish. So, I mean, with that dynamic, I'm with you. If you're going to play Nelson, play him ITD. I just don't think he has a lot of upside past the early portion of this fight. Or I shouldn't say he doesn't have a lot of upside. I don't think we can make any kind of assumptions about his cardio beyond what we've seen. So I think it's a bit wide, but I'm not really dying to die on the Nelson hill. I actually kind of think the under 1.5 is kind of decent because Nelson, he is going to bring a fight. Like that's what he does, and Herbert does crack, as does Nelson. So I don't mind that. I might take a poke at it. Plus 100 is honestly not bad. Moving on, though, we got Mohammed Mokayev. He is taking on Charles Energy Johnson, and I actually have a decent-sized bet on Charles Johnson here at about plus 390. And I know before the comment section gets carried away, and it's like, oh, John, these value pokes. It's not, to me, I said this to Luke before we came on, but it's not really a value poke from where I'm sitting. I actually think Charles Johnson is very legit. He probably should have been in the UFC several years ago. If you actually go back to 2018, he had a fight with Brandon Royval right a couple years before he debuted, where I personally thought he beat Royval pretty clearly, lost on the cards in that fight. Since then, he's done nothing but win. He's massive for flyweight, keeps a very, very high pace. He's a strong defensive grappler. You can take him down, but he's very, very tough to hold down. Ultimately, he has a lot of tools that I look for, in fighters I want to bet in the UFC, especially in a division like flyweight where, finishes are hard to come by. And on the Mokayev side, like I think Mokayev is a pretty good prospect. Like I'm not saying he's not, but he's 22 and he's pretty green. Like he can obviously wrestle a bit. And I expect that'll be his most likely path here. But I do think in terms of Mokayev's grappling, he doesn't have the best control game. Like it's been suitable so far, but the guys that he's really grappled haven't been really capable defensive grapplers. And the one capable defensive grappler he did fight actually put him in some bad positions as well. And so I know Charles Johnson spent a large portion of his camp training with Jordan Burroughs and whatnot and drilling like takedown defense. I know he's got a good get-up game. On the feet, Mokayev's decent, but I actually comfortably favor Johnson there. I think he's got better output. I think, he is longer. And I just think he's a better technical striker at this point in their respective careers. So I don't know. To me, obviously the grappling upside of Mokayev, makes him a deserved favorite. But, there's a big difference between a deserved favorite that's like, in the minus 150 range and a guy who's being priced minus 500 like he is. I feel like I can say pretty unequivocally this line is wrong. Whether that actually translates to performance in the octagon, I don't really know. But I do like Johnson a lot. I would favor Charles Johnson against a lot of guys in the UFC. So, yeah, I have a decent-sized bet on him. I think I have 2.2 units at plus 390. I also kind of like the over here. I don't really think there's a ton of finishing upside for Mokayev on the mat, and I doubt Johnson finishes him. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you as well. Like going into it, I knew the name Charles Johnson, but I wasn't really familiar with like his overall game, and I did a pretty deep dive back into his tape. And to your point, I think the guy is actually a pretty good fighter, and we were kind of talking about it before the podcast started. Like, obviously, UFC London card, a lot of the hometown guys, especially with Mokayev obviously being a highly touted 21-year-old prospect. I just think the booking from the UFC for this fight is interesting. Like in the guy's second UFC fight, he's only got 6 fights as a pro. For them to go give him a guy like Charles Johnson, I think is interesting because looking at the betting line at like minus 470 or whatever he is, I mean, that pretty much indicates that Mokayev's just going to absolutely destroy Charles Johnson. And based on the tape I watched, I don't really see that, right? Like I still favor Mokayev in the fight because I do think the wrestling and grappling component is ultimately what gets his hand raised here. But from a pricing standpoint, I can't get to Mokayev like over -200 personally. To your point, I think the stand-up probably favors Johnson as the better boxer. The one thing that concerns me is that he does throw a lot of kicks. He needs to put those kicks away in this fight and just box. And honestly, like I said, I think his pure boxing is better than Mokayev's from what I've seen. So if he can put away the kicks, box the guy, stuff some takedowns, I think he can make this fight a lot more competitive than people are assuming. Just in one of the things I noticed with Johnson, just outside of like skill set and stuff, this guy's just like a dog though, man. Like he's tough as shit, came from pretty a humble background. He's got no quit in him. He's shown he can go a hard, damn near 25 minutes. So he's got cardio. He's never been finished as a pro in a fight, even going back against Brandon Royval in I think 2018, which you touched on, John. We know that Brandon Royval's really good in the scrambles, and that fight took largely place in the scrambles. And Johnson actually won the third round in that and was still competitive in the scrambles and was never in any real deep trouble from a submission perspective from Royval. He definitely got bombed on a little bit in the first, that's for sure. But my point is that, at least from a benchmarking perspective, Brandon Royval is like a top 5 guy in the UFC now, and he fought him competitively 4 years ago, where Mokayev's overall strength of competition has not been very good. And to your point with that fight he had against Abdul Hussein, which was just like only a little over a year ago, guy who's competent wrestler, grappler, he took a round from Mokayev, a fight that turned out to be kind of a scramble fest. He got the better of it for sure. But my point is that Mokayev's not invincible. He did drop a round in that fight, even with one of his more recent fights against O'Driscoll. He was getting walked down and he was losing the boxing there. So I don't know. I feel like he's built up this invincibility complex that everybody thinks. I've seen some flaws. I've seen some holes. Do I think the kid's got an incredibly high ceiling at 21? Yes, I do. But at the end of the day, he's still only 21 with only 6 pro fights. I know he had the extensive amateur career, but point being, he's going to start fighting a lot better guys. And if he doesn't come out here and flying knee Charles Johnson or jump on his back or something, I think the fight's probably reasonably competitive. And I think Johnson's going to impress some people, win or lose.
And you and I both talked about it before, and we both heard similar things that, these two guys used to train at TMT, and Johnson, from what I heard, largely got the better of those. Now, again, Mokayev's 22 years old, so I don't put a ton of stock in there, but it's worth keeping in the back of your mind. It's not like Charles Johnson's going to be afraid to come out there and fight it. Moving on, though, we got an interesting fight here. We got Makwan Amirkhani. He's going taking on Jonathan Pierce. Pierce about -200 here. What do you think, Luke? Do you think it's wide? What are your thoughts?
Going into it, I thought I would be just laying the wood on Pierce, and it's just kind of a weird fight because there are many scenarios where I think that I shouldn't say many, but there are scenarios where Jonathan Pierce does cover -200. But I also can't unsee in so many of his recent fights that he's been caught in multiple submission attempts. Like he's been able to work out of them, but he stuck his head into a couple guillotines. He did get caught in, I think, one anaconda. His striking defense isn't very good. So I think he's live to potentially get submitted here. Makwan can wrestle too. I know Pierce is obviously known for his wrestling, but I guess I'd be kind of curious to see what happens if Makwan can put him on his back too. But I do think Pierce being a favorite makes sense because with what we know with Amirkhani, he's got about 5 strong minutes of gas. And after that, tends to fall off a cliff, just doesn't really throw many strikes on the feet. Reasonably hittable at the same time. He's been hurt multiple times, where Pierce does a pretty good job of weaponizing his cardio between his wrestling or his striking. So it's another spot if I was to bet Amirkhani, because similar to the Nelson play, I don't trust him over the course of 15 minutes. I think in the UFC, he's 2-4 when fights have hit the cards, with one of the wins coming via split. So He's just not a very good minute winner historically. I'd rather take him by early sub props, or instead of actually laying the wood on Pierce pre-fight, I would rather just look to live bet Pierce at probably a better number after one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was almost positive I was going to bet him, to be honest, before I looked at it. I share many of the same concerns, I should say. The thing is, I'm not going to bet Pierce at minus 200. I think I actually would if he went to minus 150, even pre, to be honest. But he has stuck his head in a lot of guillotines for sure. I actually think, and Evan just mentioned it in the chat, but I actually think he does a decent job of fighting chokes. Now, Amir Khani is not Christian Rodriguez, if he gets stuck in something from him, obviously. But I don't think he's a necessarily easy guy to choke. And I actually think if he fights intelligently, and we'll see if he does, the smartest path would be to just keep it standing here if he can. Amir Khani's not a terrible boxer, but he's low volume and he doesn't have any real pop behind his shots, whereas Pierce actually can crack a bit. And I think his output pressure style could really just give Amir Khani a ton of issues. In the wrestling, it's interesting. I'm with you. I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out. I'd be a little surprised if Amir Khani's able to just out wrestle him cleanly, though. Maybe he could grapple him to the point that he gets him to stick his head in something, but I really don't think he's going to come out here and just badly out wrestle Pierce. I actually rate Pierce's wrestling quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, it's just a weird fight because I actually think Pierce is a decent prospect. I have big concerns in his future about how easy he is to hit. It's going to catch up with him at some point. Yeah, obviously it did in his debut. But I don't think that's a threat here. I think the real question is just how often does Amir Khani catch something on him? Can you see Amir Khani winning a decision? It feels like a very low percentage outcome where he wins a decision here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the fight does hit the cards, I would say that's 80-20 Pierce probably.
Yeah, that's about where I am. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with you because if it turns out Amir Khani can sub him fairly easily, obviously it's not a great line. But, yeah, I mean, waiting around and playing it might be the best way here. But I do think Pierce is going to take care of business. Moving on, I believe you have a big bet here. We got Nathaniel Wood. He's taking on Charles Rosa. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good spot for Nathaniel Wood. I've just never been a Charles Rosa guy ever. I just think he's just a minus fighter in so many ways from an analytical perspective. He doesn't throw a lot of strikes. When he does throw strikes, it's often just junk kicks. He doesn't have a knockdown in the UFC in, I think, 12 fights or so now. I mean, even his fight against Kevin Aguilar, who he was able to win the stand-up against, the fight still went to split. I just think that goes to show you whether you agree or not. My point is that his optics are generally poor. He's often the guy going backwards. I just think Wood's a much better boxer. He's much faster. He's much cleaner. He hits much harder. His pacing's much more consistent. He's much more processed. He's got more tools, in my opinion. He can fight out of both stances. The problem I've always had with Wood historically is that his defense is kind of largely an afterthought, and we've seen that catch up to him at points, but at least in relation to the matchup, like I said, Charles Rosa hasn't really shown he can bust a grape throughout the course of his entire career. So, I mean, him hurting Wood is pretty low percentage in my eyes. Him outworking Wood is pretty low percentage in my eyes. And then we know that Charles Rosa gets controlled 80% of the time. His fights are spent grappling. The guy just tips over from takedowns. He's fine to play guard, fine to play from his back. He will have an aggressive guard, but we've seen guys who are competent grapplers at a bare minimum be fine on top of Charles Rosa. Like TJ Brown. TJ Brown isn't anything special as a grappler, I would say. And he was largely fine on top of Charles Rosa for the most part. So I don't see if Wood wanted to take the wrestling path here. I think he'd be fine to bank minutes on top of Rosa, who really has no get-up game or really any concern with getting up. So really the only path to victory I see for Charles Rosa is a guard sub, which is, possible. He's got a few of them. Wood has been subbed a couple times, but we're going back to 2015 when he was just a baby. So I don't really see how Charles Rosa wins this fight, to be honest.
Yeah, I bet goes the distance here, minus 180. I mean, Charles Rosa is really the perfect distance fighter. As you mentioned, he can't bust a grape. on the feet. He likes to run from fights. You know, he tries to kind of do like a Walmart Elias Theodoro type outside, you know, leg kicks, dart in and out, and just avoid big pocket exchanges. So, like, I know Wood's gotten off huge volume before, but like Rosa's going to be a guy who's going to run from volume. And, you know, on his back, he's pretty much unsubbable, if we're being honest. Like, given how, you know, he spent 7 minutes under David Jackson and 11 minutes under Bryce Mitchell and didn't get subbed. Like, I feel pretty confident he's not going to get submitted here. I don't even think, you know, Wood's durability was always something that concerned me, but I just don't think that threat is really there with Rosa. I mean, I think Wood could theoretically hurt him, but like I mentioned, Rosa's going to run, you know, for his life here. You know, we know that. And Wood, I mean, if Wood takes the path of least resistance, he's just going to grapple him. And I don't even really think it's funny. I think you and I talked about this like a year or two ago on another Charles Rosa fight. Somehow Rosa's a Ricardo Laborio black belt, but I don't even really. His submission defense is like elite, but his actual submission grappling attack, I don't find at all threatening or impressive. Really, it's very slow. He's not very positionally sound with it. I don't really think Wood will have many problems staying safe. And it's like another thing where it's like, in the unlikely event Rosa were to hurt Wood standing, I think Wood could just take him down and hold him there, you know, and not really have too many issues doing that. So, yeah, I like the over here. I actually kind of think most of the finishing upside is like probably a Wood KO, but I don't know. I think it goes the distance like 70-75% of the time here, to be completely honest. So that's the kind of position I'm taking here. Moving on, we had an interesting fight. But not that interesting, actually. I lied. We got Mark Jacasey taking on Damir Hadzovic. I don't have a lot to say here. I mean, obviously, Hadzovic is a decent striker, and if Jacasey decides that he wants to play that game, then the line's going to look really bad. But on the other side of things, if Jacasey approaches it intelligently, like he did in his last fight with Slava Borshev, he should have literally zero problems at all. Like, if you told me for a fact that Jacasey was going to just come out and grapple first, I would lay the minus 330 in a heartbeat here, because Hadzovic is that bad a grappler. He's a terrible defensive wrestler. He has no get-up game. He gives up his back really, really easily. It's really that simple. If Jacasey decides to be an idiot, he's probably going to find himself in a reasonably close fight. But ultimately, I don't think he should have any issues here. If he's smart, he's literally minus 1,000 to win this fight. He should be able to grapple Hadzovic without any issues whatsoever. But yeah, it's probably going to be a pass for me, to be honest. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. In a lot of ways, I think Jacasey has him covered, but pretty much the only reason I can't there's two reasons why I can't lay this with Mark. First, I've always just had this thing with Jacasey that I still think he's kind of a head case. There's just certain fights over the years where just the best Mark Jacasey does not show up, right? And he's lost to people. He's definitely lost to some good guys in there, but he's also lost or either had competitive minutes or rounds with people he probably shouldn't, because I do think Jacasey all around is a pretty good fighter. He's a plus athlete. He's fast, explosive, has power. He's technical, kicks well, punches well. He can wrestle. But if the best Mark Jacasey doesn't show up, and it's one of those instances, you know, Hadzovic is a decent striker. He does throw volume, and that's, I guess, point number two why I can't lay it with Jacasey. He hasn't been exactly an output machine in all of his fights either. Usually they're kind of more tepid range. You know, he'll kick and just kind of pot shot people or find finishes. So there's that. I think the path is very clearly there for him to wrestle and just wipe Hadzovic on the mat. I think that's obviously pretty evident and clear. He should do that. Am I like 100% positive he will? Not necessarily. So I know it's easy to look at the last fight, you know, where he looked like a world beater against Borchev, but like I said, there's still this thing in the back of my mind with Jacasey that the best guy doesn't always show up. So yeah, minus 330. Like I said, I think he covers it with the right game plan. I think he probably actually could knock out Hadzovic potentially. But yeah, I'm just not really interested at the price.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Similar feelings about this next fight. I'm curious about your thoughts. We got Mason Jones, Ludwig Klein. What do you think here?
Yeah, I guess I would say there's probably some similar things. The one thing I would say that's with Mason Jones is that he has been pretty consistent to do what he's going to do, though, in like every single fight. He's going to come forward. He's going to spam volume. He's a good boxer, black belt, judo, jiu-jitsu. Hasn't always been the most willing wrestler in the world. And I think Klein's actually a pretty decent technical striker. You know, he's got a nice left hand. He's got a big high kick. But in watching even back Klein's, regional footage and stuff, he's outside of him, going out there and like blasting people early. He kind of needs like more tepid range-based fights to have his most success. And that's just not something that Mason Jones is going to give to him at all. He's going to be a bull. He's going to come forward. He said he's got some pop. He hits hard. And I just really didn't. The Landwehr fight, I think, is probably the biggest concern for Klein for me here, where the fight was reasonably competitive when Landwehr was kind of just obliging him in that, mid-range, and then like roughly halfway through the fight or so, or towards the end of the second round, when Landwehr said, fuck this shit, and he just like started to like go forward and do stuff, the tides evidently shifted in that fight. I also had significant cardio concerns with Klein, where I don't have those with Jones. Like I said, he was still losing the boxing to Trezano too, who's also not known to be exactly an output machine. So the problem I've always had with Mason Jones, though, is that his defense is a complete afterthought. He's proven incredibly durable. Obviously, go back and watch the Mike Davis fight. The amount of shots that were landed on both sides there. I mean, I don't know how someone did not get knocked out in that fight, but at the UFC level, that does catch up to you at some point. He's obviously still a pretty young guy. So, I mean, I think Klein catching him with something big is possible, because obviously Klein hits hard. But in terms of who I favor on minutes standing, it's pretty clearly Jones. And in terms of who I favor on minutes and submission grappling upside on the floor is definitely Jones too. So I think him being a decent sized favorite is warranted. And I'm not really running to the window to lay the price, though.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I haven't really ever been a Klein guy, and I will give him credit for winning a tough fight with, Devontae Smith, and actually digging deep to win that fight. But I pretty much agree with everything you said. Klein, if you give him like a beautiful, pretty fight where he can kind of sit on the outside and like carefully select his shots, he can look quite good. We've seen it regionally. We saw it in his debut in the UFC. He's obviously got, some explosive finishing ability. The problem is, when fights devolve, he just kind of devolves with them. He doesn't have. I don't actually think he has much of an ability to make reads on his opponents, which I think really hurts him. Which is why, in those slow fights, he tends to do pretty well. But when guys make fights dirty, he just kind of collapses. And I mean, everything you said about Jones is on point. We know Jones isn't going to sit it back at range and give him a pretty fight. Jones is going to come forward. Jones should really dominate this fight, to be honest. I like Mason Jones, but to your point, it's two things with Jones. And again, the reason I'm not laying this number, I think you could make a case to lay the number with Jones. But one is, as you mentioned, he doesn't wrestle like that often. He will go to it at times, but not as often as a guy that has the skill set that he has should, if we're being honest. And the other thing is just, he's going to get knocked out eventually. It's going to happen. I know Davis didn't do it, and it was impressive how many shots he ate. But even like durable guys whose chins don't crack, like Justin Gaethje, eventually got knocked out. If you take enough concussive damage in a fight or a shot in the wrong spot, you get put out. And that's, I think the one thing we know Klein can do is he does have, decent finishing ability. And so I'm not really trying to play Jones, despite his large advantages here, against a guy who has the kind of finishing ability that Klein does. So it's a pass for me. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I think Jones should roll right through him. Moving on, though, I have my biggest bet of the card right here. We got Paul Craig taking on Volkan Oezdemir. I'm on Volkan big. I think I have 4 units on him, like minus 135. I'm just at the point with Craig I haven't even really been a Paul Craig fader, to be honest. I've largely avoided the Paul Craig landmines, but I kind of think this is going too far now where we are in terms of this line. I know Craig beat Jamal Hill and Nikita Krylov in his last fights, but like if we're being honest, Jamal Hill doesn't really have much submission grappling experience. In a lot of respects, he's fairly young. He made a couple mistakes early in that fight that got him injured, and that's how he lost the fight. Krylov, like if you could tell me one top 10 fighter without me knowing the results of their last fight who would get subbed by a triangle for Paul Craig, it wouldn't be Magomed Ankalaev. It would be Nikita Krylov. He just he's another guy who's gotten subbed a bunch in his career and makes some bad decisions on the mat from time to time. Craig's obviously got a tricky guard. We all know that. It's very dangerous for 205. But the reality is men's guard subs, I know how many times Craig has done it. They're not reliable. I know it keeps happening. But honestly, like just going through like Craig's career, it's like the Ankalaev fight's the famous one. And then obviously those last two. But other than that, it's like Kennedy, Vinicius Moreira he beat, Shogun who's washed, Antagulov. He got destroyed by Tyson Pedro and Khalil Roundtree. And this kind of seems like that to me. Like, I know Craig has decent striking metrics, but it's all empty volume and meaningless kicks. He still is defensively unsound in the pocket. On the feet here, Volkan's going to butcher him. I have really no doubt about that. And even in the grappling, like, I don't think Craig is very likely to get Volkan down. Like, maybe he can get a takedown in this fight. But, Rakic went 1 for 9. Ankalaev went 1 for 4. Neither got meaningful control against him. The only time we've seen Volkan have really lose in the grappling was a Smith fight, which was fought at an insane pace that he gassed out in. And DC, and even early against Daniel Cormier, he looked fine. He got up the first time he got taken down. Cormier eventually broke him there and finished him. But, I mean, those guys are not – Paul Craig is not on that level. And it's like, so maybe Paul Craig pulls guard here and Volkan's dumb enough to oblige it. That could happen. But even if that happens, like let's say Craig pulls guard 3 times in a row, I think more likely than not, Volkan's not going to get subbed. Like I really feel like pretty passionately about that. Maybe I'm just taking the bait here, but I honestly think he should really handle Craig however he wants to this fight. It kind of reminds me of the Latifi fight a lot, where a lot of people, Latifi was off a couple wins, were trying to make, a case for Latifi, and then Volkan just went and, kicked the crap out of him. Unless Volkan makes a really tragic error in this fight, I think he should be fine. I think the line should be closer to 70-75%. What do you think?
Yeah, going into it, I was like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with this. And then I went back and I watched a lot more tape on it. And if you really contextualize Craig's UFC wins, I'm not saying from like a meritocratic standpoint they're not good, because there's obviously some good ones in there. But I think what people are really, really missing about this fight is how the subs are actually happening. If you go back and watch all 8 of them, 6 of them are a result of people engaging with Craig, right? 6 of the 8. So it's not as if on every single one of these, it's a double, it's a transition to the back, it's a rear naked choke. Like that's not how it's happening, right? It's Nikita Krylov. I guess let's just run through it real quick because it's not going to take that long. Krylov goes out there with his dick in his hand and tries to prove he's the better grappler. Nearly knocks Craig out in the guard, but still the most retarded game plan you've ever seen because he had pretty evident striking advantages. And, Craig made him pay for it. So Krylov deserved everything he got in that fight. Jamal Hill, gigantic fucking moron. Clear striking advantage is pretty – he would have knocked Paul Craig out in 2 minutes. And not only did he engage him or go to the ground with him, he had multiple opportunities to disengage. And then he went back in again and got his arm broken. That was just beautiful karma. I'm sorry, because that was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. Like that was really stupid. The Shogun fight, that's one where he was actually able to land multiple takedowns, get to his back and Shogun tap to strikes. But just contextually with where Shogun was at in his career. I mean, the guy was like one of the best fighters of all time at one point in Pride, and now he's tapping to strikes to Paul Craig. That's where Shogun was at that point. Antagulov, right into the fire with him, gets subbed. the first Hua fight, bombs on Hua in the first, and then Hua actually just pretty much rides him out on top. Moreira, he clips with a knee, and then he subs him. And Chekwu was probably on his way to winning that fight, goes into his guard. And then I can't remember the exact sequence of his debut against De Silva, but I think it was similar. But then even Ankalaev, pretty clear striking advantages, went to the wrestling, gets caught with a second left. My point is how these subs are happening. Volkan is a kickboxer. He's not a grappler. He has no fucking reason to go to the ground with him. None, right? If he does, I give up on handicapping MMA. I'm not saying Craig can't sub him. What I am saying is you have to look at how the submissions are historically coming from Craig. Could he take Volkan down and submit him? I think it's possible. It's in play. Could he?
Do you think he can hold him down though?
No, probably not. But I think it would be transitionally because Volkan has a really bad tendency to give his back when he gets taken down. So that's where my concern is and why I'm not going as heavier on this as you are. But at the end of the day, the guy still stuffs takedowns at 80% and his stuff takedowns from far much better pure wrestlers than Paul Craig with much better chain wrestling capabilities than Paul Craig as well. To your point, I mean, on the feet, like this isn't even funny. Like because of the recent success of Paul Craig, people forget how big of a massive liability this guy is at space. Like Menafield just went forward and killed him. Jimmy Crude even hurt him. And then obviously we saw the Roundtree fight. Like I understand these fights are older, but you have to contextualize his recent run of how all of these subs are happening. And there hasn't been a ton of distance exchanges in the last, 3 years for Paul Craig. Volkan's a top 10 guy who's legitimately taken rounds off of the best fighters in this division standing, right? So how does Paul Craig even compete here, let alone survive with Volkan on the feet? Like I think Volkan fucking kills him. To me, this fight comes down to whether Volkan's stupid or not, largely.
And that's kind of my thing, is it's just like, I don't see a fight where Paul Craig is competitive standing. Whereas you could sell me, and even though I don't want this to happen, let me be clear, you could sell me on Volkan riding him out on top for 3 rounds. You cannot sell me on Paul Craig winning a kickboxing match here, So
at the end of the day, to me, I know what I'm getting into. I understand it, but I think it's a good buy low spot. And I think you also have to factor in, Volkan's like the first elite level fighter he fought. But, in a second, I think it largely is. With the correct game plan, this fight really shouldn't even be close, to be honest.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Moving on to another retarded fight. We got Molly Mccann going off as a minus 400 favorite, taking on Hannah Goldie. What are your thoughts, Luke?
I mean, honestly, there's not much to unpack here. I think it's a pretty good fight for Molly in the sense that despite what the metrics say, she is actually more consistent to throw. She's the better boxer. We've actually seen her go out there and get inside and outstrike much bigger girls, at least in stature, than Hannah Goldie. I think she should probably win the striking reasonably clean here. She probably has takedown upside, but in terms of this line to lay over minus 400 on Molly, you would have to assume she wins this fight at a bare minimum 85 to 90% of the time. And it's still lower-ish, sloppy level WMMA. Molly still eats nearly 5 significant strikes per minute. When Molly's been put on bottom, it's looked fucking terrible. She has been sub before. I understand it was against Jillian Robertson. How good of a wrestler is Hannah Goldie? How good of a grappler is Hannah Goldie? Probably not great, but she is physically strong. The girl's probably on every single fucking supplement in the entire world. So, if Goldie could find her way into top position, things could get pretty interesting. Honestly, if you go back and watch the Belbita fight, Goldie ended that in mount. And if there was 20 seconds left on the fight, she actually probably finishes her, to be honest. So I don't know. To lay this kind of number on Molly, despite me thinking it's largely a pretty good style matchup for, it's 1, how much value are you extracting? 2, in the long term, laying these type of numbers on a lowerish level WMA fight is not going to be a profitable angle for you.
Yeah. Molly Mccann minus 420 in an MMA fight is actually insane. I honestly, I'm not. Let me be clear and just start by saying I'm not betting Hannah Goldie, but
I was hoping you were going to drop. I got 2 units on hand.
No, but like you could tell me literally, you could tell me a random woman who'd never fought in the UFC before, who was 6-6 regionally, that you were betting at plus 320 against Molly Mccann, and I'd be like, okay, that's fine. Like Molly Mccann is not. I agree. She actually has decent metrics, but like she is not good at MMA. Like, sure, she's a good pocket boxer. She'll attempt takedowns here or there, but I don't actually think she's that skilled in anything. And she's an athletic zero, pretty much. The problem is, I just think Molly's got a lot. Like to your point, Goldie can't really strike at all. Molly's got a lot more physicality than she does, a lot more output. She should win the striking easy. Like if Goldie was even like a C-level wrestler, I'd probably take the bet here just because I really think Molly's grappling is quite poor. And it is kind of something that I think could be funny, Molly getting herself armbarred, because I could actually see that, envision that happening. But look, I'm not going to dive too deep into this. It's just like I've tried to think about, because I did want to bet Goldie, because I'm just like, this is insane. You know, the Molly Mccann is being lined like this. It's just her margins in winning a decision here they're so thin. They're so thin because of the volume gap and because Goldie doesn't really proactively wrestle. I say this and I'm going to pass, and Goldie's going to land 6 takedowns and win a clean 30-27. But just watch.
I think MMA gambling Twitter might completely self-destruct if that's the case. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of Molly parlay money this week,
which is crazy, dude. Like, could you like that? That's like I kind of think. I don't really think I think minus 300 is like an appropriate line here, that Molly wins this 3 out of 4. Like I genuinely think, because it's WMMA and because Molly's not very skilled, that Goldie could weasel a fight 1 in 4 times. Like that wouldn't really be like, would you really be shocked if Goldie weaseled the split decision? You know?
Well, I mean, the thing outside of her fight with Blaydes and then the Whitmire fight, but I mean, largely what she does is kind of like Charles Rosa, to be honest, where if you watch
very much earlier, so.
Yeah, if you watch her Contender Series fight and then you watch her debut, I think against Granger, she's kind of a girl who just like circles the outside and throws like kicks. So like maybe Molly's like just relentlessly coming forward and she just has trouble tracking Goldie down, like, and is just like swinging wild overhands, and I don't know.
That wouldn't be that crazy. That really wouldn't be that crazy. The thing for me is, it's just like, I can very easily picture that, because you're 100% right. That's the perfect comparison. I think she landed like 120 or so strikes on Contenders too. It was a very high volume of strikes. The problem is, it's like it's in London too, and I'm not saying I'm not really like, you know, superstitious, and I don't really think there's that like as much home cooking that goes into it as people say, but you know, the crowd's going to be going nuts whenever Molly does anything. I just think it's, and you know, plus the whole travel thing and the time difference. I think it's a tough ask for Goldie to win there, which is why I'm not getting involved. But it's like, I could never parlay her. I can see a path where Goldie, you know, wins, like minimizes exchanges and wins a low volume decision, or subs her from guard. But it's a pass. I hope Molly knocks her out. I hope Molly knocks her out. They run another London card next year, and they actually give her someone who's okay and is plus 300 again, now that she's got like the whole Barstool hype train behind her. But yeah, I'm already, you know, I'm betting enough big dogs this week that like I don't really need to have my money involved here. Moving on, I'm curious for your take on this. We got Nikita Krylov, Alex Gustafsson. What do you think here?
I kind of think Gustafsson's the side, and I still might do it if the line keeps coming. The problem I have, just the main problem I have, is I guess I just don't really know what type of Alexander Gustafsson we're going to see at 35 years old in 2022. He has technically retired once already, just from a gambling narrative perspective. 2 things that I really don't like off the top. He does look in pretty good shape, though, and peeping his IG. That's what I will say. But yeah, it's another spot where I think, yeah, you run the fight like 3 to 4 years ago. This line's absolutely insane, and Gustafsson's probably a decent sized favorite. And so I think that's why we're seeing the line the way it is. But I think Gustafsson's the better striker. He's got more power. He's shown historically to be pretty difficult to take down. I think Jones went like 1 for 11 in the first fight, 1 for 5 in the second fight. Glover went 1 for 5, and I think DC went like 1 for 5 or something like that. So, I mean, he's fought some pretty high level guys where he's not just like keeling over from takedowns, but it is kind of hard to unsee his more recent run of the times he's been taken down. It just hasn't looked particularly good. And we know that Krylov's a pretty potent offensive grappler in that right. So that's kind of what makes me nervous here more than anything outside of the age, because I do think Krylov's probably a better grappler. But yeah, I think it's a dog or pass. Whether I do it or not, I'm not sure, just because if a shitty version of Gustafsson shows up, then, this is going to look like a pretty atrocious bet. And I knew what I was getting into pre-fight, but I think even if listen, I think like the prime version of Alexander Gustafsson is gone. Like we're not getting, the Alexander Gustafsson we saw in the first John Jones fight. Like I understand that, but like even if he's like 70% of that, I think he probably wins this fight. So it's just kind of I don't know where his motivation is and all this stuff. So it's kind of narrative primarily that's keeping me off, because said if a decent version of Alexander Gustafsson shows up here, this line is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I actually think this is and it's why I haven't bet it, and I'm not sure if I will, because I think this has kind of been a blind spot for me in the past. It's just the floor on Gustafsson is obviously his ceiling is quite high here. His ceiling is hindsight. Oh my God, that line was crazy. He should have been a favorite. But his floor with the unknowns is quite low, I think. If you told me that the result of Saturday is they come out there, Krylov just absolutely owns him and finishes him, I don't think I'd be blown away, the thing is, like, as you mentioned, the retirement thing, he had 2 years off. His last fight with Verdum obviously was not a good look. But like the Verdum fight, I can forgive a little bit because it's like the first fight at heavyweight. Verdum, obviously, probably the best heavyweight submission grappler ever in MMA. The fight before that, though, with Smith is something that I can't really unsee. That is, I know he's always been a bit of a point striker, but like he'll sit down on his shots at times and he'll put clear stamps on rounds, and he just basically pitter-pattered all fight there. And then the finishing sequence where he went for a head and arm throw and just got his back taken and tapped out was tough to watch and it's tough to unsee, because he looked like an old man in that fight. Now, maybe his motivation was gone, and I agree with you. He does look like he's in good shape. And I think you're spot on that 4 years ago, he's probably minus 250 here. Like, I think at his peak, he's probably a better wrestler than Krylov. He's certainly a better striker, more mobile for sure. But he's not at his peak, as you mentioned, So it's like, I don't know what we're getting. I plus 250 Gustafsson would be interesting, I think. Plus 230 would be interesting and maybe worth a poke. I don't really know how to cap something like this. Like, is he coming back because he just needs the money? Does he actually want to fight and make a run? I somehow doubt that, because then why would he retire at 32 the first time after the Smith fight, I don't know, because every part of my brain, it's like when you tape the fight and you see how they match up stylistically, is like, that's a pretty good fight for Gustafsson. This is not a guy who should lose to Nikita Krylov. But then it's just like you look at his last 2 fights, he retired, he's 35. I don't know. It's scary to me, and it's also scary to me that the line is like staying where it is, because it seems fairly obvious, and it makes me think, I don't even want to say someone knows something, but I feel like there's probably some sharp money holding the line up. Yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. If the line keeps going, maybe I'll take a small stab at Gustafsson, but just like very, very hard to be passionate about Gustafsson in this fight and where he is in his career. It's just such a big unknown. I think I'd be more okay with not betting it and Gustafsson dominating than I would be betting it and then watching Krylov just absolutely own him, Like that I can live with the passing on a win because I passed because of the unknowns. Betting it and then being like, wow, this was so obvious would be, way, way worse. But moving on, we got oh god, Patty Pimblett, Jordan Levitt. This fight's hilarious. The trash talk has been pretty hilarious. I expect it'll continue to go that way. But I bet Jordan Levitt, and I'm probably going to bet the over as well, since that's plus money. To be honest, honestly, I know the UFC is pushing Patty. I know they're giving him Levitt because they're trying to give him a win in London, and there's not many other fighters at 55, period, who they could give Patty Pimblett and he could comfortably defeat, in my opinion. Um, I'm small on Levitt here, not a big bet or anything, but I gotta say, I am not a Patty Pimblett guy at all. Could he have improved? Yeah, he's 27, he's young. There certainly is big improvement upside in Patty's, career trajectory. But I just I don't. It's so if you look at his two UFC fights, and you know Luigi Vendramini basically kicks his ass for 3.5 minutes, then gets clipped. Patty goes rabies, knocks him out. First standing KO of his entire career. Then last fight, Kazula Vargas comes out, takes him down. Kazula Vargas is a terrible grappler, okay? Holds him down for 2.5 minutes before Patty sweeps him and submits him. Again, perfectly tailored matchup, but it's not like things were going well. So you go back regionally, his last two fights before the UFC, they're both cans, finishes them both in round one. The 4-fight run before that, he fought a guy named Savitas who he was losing to and hit a flying triangle against. He got absolutely dominated by Soren Bach, mostly in the grappling. He looked good in round one in that fight, gassed out. Bach proceeded to ragdoll him for the next 4 rounds of that fight. Fight before that fought Julian Erosa, won a decision that was, if you go back and watch the fight, a flat-out robbery. Like, he pretty clearly lost the fight. He got dominated most of that fight. And then the fight before that, Nad Narimani, a guy who we have seen relatively recently get dominated in the grappling, 50-45'd him. Literally just wrestled him the entire fight with no problem at all. And, again, those fights were a long time ago and he could have made improvements. But I look at Patty and it's like, yeah, he's got a physicality edge here, but his striking is a mess. Like, I know he got the KO over Vendramini, but he has no defense whatsoever. He has no management of distance, really. It's just kind of like aggressive boxing. And his grappling, yeah, he's a dangerous offensive grappler. You have to grant him that. But he has basically no hips when guys try to take him down. When he's on bottom, I don't think he's a very dangerous bottom player. He doesn't really seem to know what to do. He tends to use a lot of energy early, and just about every time he's gone through the first round, he's slowed down precipitously. And so, okay, so the UFC's giving him Jordan Levitt. Look, I don't really rate Levitt that much. I'm not a big Levitt fan. I get why everybody thinks Patty's going to dominate him. The thing is, Levitt's a decent wrestler. He lacks physicality and strength, but he is a decent wrestler, and he does have a decent submission game and a decent top game. And I look at these two, and I think the common theme all week is everybody saying, oh, Patty's going to knock him out. Bet that Patty KO plus 250. And it's like, I know he knocked out Vendramini, but again, that was his first KO in 20 fights standing. Like, yeah, I guess he could finish him on the mat, but I really doubt, Puelles couldn't finish Levitt on the mat that Patty is. So you're telling me he's going to knock out a guy for the second time in his career standing who hasn't been hurt in the UFC against better strikers than Patty Pimblett? I'm not really buying that. I kind of think if Patty goes crazy the way he did in his fight with Vendramini, he probably gets taken down here, and there's a decent chance he gets held down. I will say I think Patty could hold Levitt down as well. I don't think he's great on bottom. I don't think either of them are great on bottom. Like, I think either one of them gets the top position here, they can have pretty significant success. But if the first round's probably going to be at a high pace. Like, I'm expecting Patty to slow in this fight, and I think Levitt could slow too because I don't think he has great gas. But it's just a fight that I think is a very don't want to say it's evens. Like, I favor Patty like 60% just on like athleticism and strength. But technically, I think it's a pretty close fight. Even standing, I know it's like tempting to make fun of Levitt for how he approached the Ogden fight, but like Levitt's not going to oblige a brawl. And if Patty does slow down, is there a reason Levitt can't just have success kicking his calf and running away from fighting? Like, I could easily imagine that happening. Yeah, I mean, to me, the line is just very clearly wide here. You have a grappler taking on another grappler who has traditionally gotten grappled by guys who aren't even that good at grappling. Like, that doesn't really make much sense to me. So I have a small play on Levitt. I'm pretty interested in the over because, as I mentioned, I think people are putting way too much stock in the Vendramini KO. And I think Patty's chances of finishing Levin on the mat are pretty low. And I think Levin's chances of finishing Patty are likely equally low. So it's like over is at plus money. If it goes the distance is at plus 220 on some books, which to me is completely crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think Levitt's live here. I have him at about 40%. Small play for me. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, so I give Patty just a little bit more, I guess, than you do, but I still do think the line is wide. I think I put Patty 65% personally. So yeah, I guess it is getting close to kind of like Levitt playable-ish territory. Honestly, though, if I was to play the fight, honestly, I like your second angle of just the fight goes the distance. To your point, Patty only has one KO standing. Levitt I do think he's going to get absolutely torched at some point in the UFC. I'm not necessarily convinced this is the spot. I also think, Patty saying that he's going to come out there and take his head off is also potentially influencing public opinion here. But to your point, if Patty just goes aggro I do think he wins the stand-up, but I do think if he goes too aggro, I mean, that does open up those reactionary takedowns for Levitt at the same time. And I do think there's a scenario where this fight does just turn into like a scramble fest where they get into like weird leg transitions and stuff like that, where like I think Patty is the better grappler of the two. Do I think he's like a much better grappler of the two? Not really. That's the one thing I will say for Levitt is like his jiu-jitsu is funky, man. He's got
very weird.
He's got some interesting crafty setups, kind of like 10th planet-ish, which doesn't always translate the greatest to MMA. But, my point is that I don't necessarily see like, I don't want to say I don't see, but like Patty just takes him down, holds him down for 10 minutes necessarily. Like, I guess I think there's going to be some trading of positions here. And obviously, both guys have never been finished and their pro careers are submitted. From at least a defensive grappling standpoint, both have largely proven to be pretty good. I think one of the guys is on, did Puelis get to Levitt's back?
Briefly, I think. Puelis is a good grappler, though.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's probably the route I would rather go than a side and just go with the over because, yeah, I think the common consensus is that either Patty's going to knock him out or someone's getting submitted because it turns into a jiu-jitsu match. But I'm honestly more so at the side that turns into a back-and-forth semi-jiu-jitsu match that goes over. And the whole London crowd is going to be very disappointed in this fight because I think people are assuming this is going to be like a really great fight and a banger. I think it's going to be a shitty, boring fight, if I'm being completely honest with you.
I'm with you. And honestly, like, I wouldn't hate if Patty ended up being good. Like, he is fun. I think anybody, with a sense of humor enjoys him. I don't really see it, I'm not, maybe he makes those improvements, but I really think people have the Vendramini fights just stuck in their head way too much.
Or he just turns out to be fucking Sage Northcutt and Paige Van Zandt and turns out to be just a complete UFC hype train fraud when he starts fighting real fighters.
Dude,
I think it's possible.
They originally were talking about making this Jared Gordon. That is a line I would kill for. Like, Jared Gordon as an underdog to this guy, Like, that is hopefully next if he takes care of Levitt. Yeah. Anyway, we had a good co-main event here, man. Jack Hermanson, he's taking on Chris Curtis. Curtis is making his, I want to say it's his 5th fight in 9 months, something like that. Pretty wild turnaround here off the Vieira fight where he took some shots in that fight. What do you think is going to happen here?
Honestly, this is one I really don't have much of an opinion on going in. I thought I was going to be like auto playing Hermanson. I do think he was the side if you got in like around that plus money, but this was one of the later fights I've got to. So I think the market's kind of corrected a bit from it. Obviously I favor Jack in the wrestling and the grappling, better top game. But I do still kind of favor Curtis in the boxing, to be honest. Like, I know that Hermanson throws a ton of volume. Like in his last, like, I think 3 5-round fights, he's landed over 100 significant strikes. But I've honestly just never been a fan of the stand-up of Hermanson. I think it's just empty volume largely. Like, I don't think he hits very hard. He kicks a bunch too. He's pretty easily counterable. I just think Curtis is a little bit slicker. Do I think Curtis like blows him out of the water standing or anything? No, but I do think the power upside lies with him too. And I'd favor him a little bit more on technique too. So I think honestly, the fight being around to pick him is kind of fair. I understand that this has the potential to be an excellent buy low spot on Hermanson, which I'm sure that's probably your opinion, John, is I believe you probably have a bet here, but I don't know. I think I'm just going to pass it also, given the fact that I've just been categorically wrong about the entire career of Chris Curtis. So, and I can't seem to pick his fights right to save my life or even really analyze him as a fighter. So that's kind of in the back of my head too. But I do think Hermanson at plus money was the side.
Yeah, I bet Hermanson for a couple units at evens. I obviously bet Vieira against Curtis last fight and was wrong. What I think is kind of interesting, though, like it's very hard for me to feel like Curtis has made big defensive grappling improvements. I know that's like the natural inclination, and like I keep seeing people cite, defended 20 takedowns against Vieira without contextualizing the fact that like the last 10 of those were gassed out Vieira shooting from basically a mile away. But even like the early takedowns in that fight, Vieira's wrestling is really more just like bull in a china shop, like rush you with a double leg and try to get you down. And you could see like once they got in the clinch, like Vieira kind of didn't really know what to do, and he couldn't just rip him down via strength. And I think in terms of like their ability to get takedowns, Vieira is probably stronger than Hermanson, but I think he's a lot more clever. Obviously Hermanson has that Greco background, but he also does a pretty good job, chaining takedowns and kind of like using weight shifts, get his opponents off balance. So I think he's going to have a bit more success than Vieira did getting the takedown. On the mat, he's obviously way better than Curtis is. He should own him there if he does get it there. But even standing, I think I give Hermanson a tad more credit than you do, just because, at least I should say, with respect to this fight, I agree with your take on Hermanson stand-up largely. What I can't really get past with Curtis is you basically had Phil Hawes having a career performance against him, striking-wise, early in that fight before he got clipped. Brendan Allen, who's striking I don't rate at all, hung fine with him early in that fight. And then, Rodolfo Vieira just landed 60% of his distance strikes, kept hitting him with the same 1-2 over and over and over again. That ended up being a close decision in a 15-minute kickboxing match. I know Hermanson lost to his teammate, Sean Strickland, but Hermanson, at least in the early portions of that fight, kept that pretty close on volume. He kept the volume pretty close with Vettori, too, over 5 rounds. So I kind of think, Jack's not a guy who's going to go forward and bite the mouthpiece in the pocket. I think his kicking and kind of outside-based game could have some success or a lot of success here against Curtis. And I think the cardio dynamic favors Jack pretty dramatically. We saw Curtis start to fade late against Vieira as well. And then you just factor in the fact that this is, 3 weeks notice, and he fought Vieira 5 weeks ago, and it's not like he didn't take damage in that fight. He got hit a lot in that fight. It's a very, very quick turnaround for Chris Curtis here, for a fight that Hermanson's had a full camp for. So yeah, it's just like, and to your last point, like, I think it's a great buy low spot. Like, Jack's a top 10 guy who just lost to Marvin Vettori, who fought for a title, and Sean Strickland, who's ranked in the top 5. Like, can he really be evens with Chris Curtis? Like, someone just said it, in the chat, like, a PFL reject's on the brink of being a contender in the UFC. Like, that is a 34-year-old guy who couldn't get through Ray Cooper, is on the verge of like being a top 10 guy in the UFC. I'm not really buying it. I think Jack's a much better fighter. I think he's much more proven. I think he's going to have an easier time getting takedowns, but yeah, I kind of think this is where the Curtis train runs out of steam. And if I'm wrong, I don't know. I'm just not going to bet Chris Curtis fights ever again. So that'll be that. Moving on, though, we have great main event. We got Curtis Blaydes taking on Tom Aspinall. And it's funny because, like, I tweeted about, liking Blaydes this week, and I got a bunch of shit. Like, when are you going to realize Aspinall's legit? And to be honest, I do think he's legit. Like, I after the Volkov fight, I'm pretty much in the camp that Aspinall's a top 5 heavyweight in the world. I think it's pretty hard to say otherwise, even with the questions around him regarding, the cardio dynamic, the chin grappling. What we do know is he's a very good striker. He's very fast. He hits very, very hard. And obviously he's got very good jiu-jitsu. Like, there's no question about that. So, yeah, I mean, I think he's legit. The thing is, it's like there's a big difference from, being legit, should have been wider than minus 120 against Alexander Volkov, and being a favorite against Curtis Blaydes. Let's go back 2 years. Curtis Blaydes was minus 500 against Alexander Volkov. This is, and largely dominated that fight. Curtis Blaydes, he presents a whole lot of issues. The obvious one is obviously the wrestling. I don't even think we need to get into it that much, just because, we all know Blaydes is going to shoot takedowns here. It's probably, the biggest question of this fight is how does Aspinall do defending them? How does he do off bottom? We don't really know. I actually kind of think Aspinall is going to be able to defend takedowns early here. He's a big dude and he's athletic. It wouldn't shock me if he's able to keep, the early portions of this fight on the feet. But I do think, the later the fight goes, the more they're going to come. And I also kind of think Blaydes striking is getting, like, weirdly discounted. It's almost like Blaydes gets graded on a curve. It's very weird, the takes I've seen about Blaydes' chin, Blaydes is overrated. He's so unimpressive. It's like, well, he gassed out against Volkov, when he set the heavyweight record for takedowns in a fight. Yes, he did gas out in that fight. He won 30-27 against Jairzinho. He looked really unimpressive there. Beats a top 10 heavyweight 30-27, unimpressive. Last fight, fights Chris Dawkins. Then what came out of that fight was not, oh my God, Blaydes just kicked the shit out of this dude who everybody's calling an elite striker. It was, wow, Curtis didn't wrestle. Guy's a moron. He just, like, if he is not utterly dominant, because that's how the early part of his career went, he's being treated as if he's not a good striker, when in the reality is, outside of really the Volkov fight when he was tired down the stretch, he's pretty much handled everybody's fought on the feet. The first Francis fight, no, but the second Francis fight was a minute. The Lewis fight, he was absolutely picking him apart. He dominated JDS standing, finished him standing. He beat up Jairzinho on the feet for the most part in that fight. And then he obviously dominated Chris Dawkins. Am I saying I expect him to outstrike Aspinall? I am not, but I think it's much more competitive than people are, kind of giving it credence for being. And, Aspinall's chin's a bit, not a concern, but we don't really know what it's like. Whereas we know Blaydes' chin is rock solid. Like, say what you want about 3 KOs. The first one was a doctor stoppage. The second one, he ate about 10 nukes from Ngannou, and it arguably was a bad stoppage. And the third one, he just shot into an uppercut. Like, that would have put anybody out. Other than that, the guy's eaten bombs throughout his career and looked completely fine. And so I kind of think striking is going to be pretty competitive here. I think Blaydes knocking out Aspinall is probably a higher percentage outcome than people realize in this fight. I think Blaydes throws a lot of calf kicks, and I kind of think how Aspinall responds to that is a bit of a question mark. So, yeah, I obviously favor Aspinall in the striking, but I think it's more competitive than most do. Blaydes, we obviously know, has great cardio for heavyweight, whereas Aspinall, we don't really know. We do know he started to slow down against Arlovsky. And I do think eventually Blaydes takedowns are going to come, and when they do, they're just going to make Aspinall more and more tired. So, yeah, I mean, look, Tom can win this fight for sure. He's definitely legit. He could definitely knock Blaydes out. But for me, it's like I basically can't favor anybody in the division against Blaydes if it goes to a decision. Personally, I rank Blaydes like the best and most well-rounded heavyweight in the division. Like, I think I'd probably take him even against Francis at this point as a dog. Yeah, I mean, if Aspinall beats him, I won't be shocked. But I mean, Curtis Blaydes is a different animal than Alexander Volkov is. I kind of just feel like Blaydes has to be like minus 150 here. You can say, oh, it's a close fight or whatever, margins will be thin. Yeah, margins should be thin on either side on the feet. Even on the Aspinall side, as I mentioned, they're probably thin. but one guy has a potential, depending what Aspinall's bottom game and cardio look like, minus 500 path to victory, whereas the other guy probably needs to knock him out. So I have 2.5 units at Blaydes plus 115. I think he should clearly be a small favorite here. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird spot for me because historically, I mean, I think I'd be with you all over Blaydes. I mean, you broke down the fight pretty well, to be honest. It's just honestly one of those gut feeling things for me. I think he dies. Honestly,
he might.
I think he gets smoked. Like I said, the Lewis fight, kind of concerning. The one fight that's always bothered me was the Rosenstrike fight. Personally, I know he was winning in the striking, but at the same time, we know that Rosenstrike just doesn't throw anything.
Yeah, that's true.
He obviously went to the wrestling and still, I think, got like 7 minutes of control time. So, I mean, I guess you can make the argument, well, he was clearly winning the stand-up, so why does he need to, go to the wrestling right off the jump? My point more so being is that Rosenstrike has one path to victory in his fights, and that's to win by knockout. And he still decided to stand and strike with him for 8 minutes. And I was someone who had a hefty size bet on him there against Rosenstrike. And despite winning a 30-27, I was like, bro, I still didn't feel good about it. It was one of those weird spots I just didn't feel good about. And the one thing with Aspinall is I think he has the speed of like a middleweight, to be honest. He's just so incredibly fast. He's just so fast, and Blaydes can kind of just shoot far out from at certain points. Like even Lewis fight aside, like I think Aspinall's footwork is pretty good too. So like, yeah, I have to give the wrestling upside to Blaydes, no doubt about it. I can't really argue the point that he has probably a stronger, path to victory, at least in terms of being more consistent, where there are more question marks on the Aspinall side. But like I said, it's just a spot for me where, I'm not saying he can't compete with Aspinall on the feet, but I think he's playing a pretty dangerous game, and I just don't see him surviving over the course of extended distance exchanges with Aspinall personally. So am I laying chalk on Tom Aspinall? No, I'm not, but I don't know. To me, it just feels like a trap on Blaydes, but I know I completely understand the reason for it. If I was to bet it, despite my take that Aspinall knocks him out from a value perspective, I probably would be betting Blaydes. I know there's a ton of other sharp people betting Blaydes, but it's just one of these ones that I'm just going to kind of go with my gut with and pass on it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't blame you. Like, I honestly, I kind of have that feeling in my gut as well that he's going to get knocked out. But it's just, for me, it's just like, I mean, I think extremely highly of Blaydes, obviously. So I really, like, if Aspinall goes through Blaydes, he's probably winning the title, if we're being honest, at some point. And it wouldn't surprise me. He might be the guy, He's, like you said, his speed for heavyweight is really remarkable. Like, it was kind of interesting in taping it. Dawkins is very, very fast, and Aspinall is obviously quite a bit faster than Dawkins is. Lags actually just posted something that's interesting. I don't think the under 3.5 is bad either. Dude, they open the inside. Some books open ends inside the distance at minus 200 here, which is I took a fair chunk of what I could get on it, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, I won't be shocked if Aspinall knocks him out. I think he's the real deal. I'll bet Curtis Blaydes is a dog against anybody. And guess what? If Tom Aspinall wins this, I will probably bet him against anybody, to be honest, as long as he's reasonably lined. So that's where I come down for it. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining us tonight. You can find me on Twitter at MMA Fox. You can find Luke at SWR_betting. Please drop a like and subscribe. We'd really, really appreciate it. I'm going to figure out this week how to get us up on Apple Podcasts, so we'll be there as well. I'll tweet out the link once that's up. Yeah, guys, thanks. Good luck this weekend on your bets. Early card. Should be fun. I hope everybody wins money. And, yeah, we'll be back next week, same time, 10 p.m. Eastern. Good luck. Let's go. Take it easy, everybody.
Peace.